There is a moment that Tsutomu Yamaguchi remembered for the rest of his life. Not the explosion, not the heat, not even the moment he thought he was going to die. The moment he remembered most clearly was the silence just before. The way the morning felt completely ordinary. The way the sky looked like any other sky. The way he was thinking about getting home. He was 29 years old. He had a wife. He had a young son. He was a naval engineer for Mitsubishi, and he had been away from home for 3 months on a work assignment in a city he didn't particularly like, working on a project that was almost finished. And on the morning of the 6th of August, 1945, he was finally going home. He had already packed his bags. He had already said his goodbyes to his colleagues at the shipyard. He had his travel documents. His train was leaving that afternoon. He just needed to get through one last morning, pick up his travel permit from the office, and then he would be on his way back to his wife, back to his son, back to his city, back to his life. His city was Nagasaki. But first, he had to survive Hiroshima. Let's go back a little further, because the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi doesn't begin with an atomic bomb. It begins with a decision that was completely routine, the kind of decision that nobody remembers making because it seems like nothing at the time. In the spring of 1945, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries sent Yamaguchi to Hiroshima. He was part of a team of engineers tasked with designing a new oil tanker for the company's shipbuilding division. It was important work, wartime work, and it required him to be on site for months. He rented a small room, learned his way around the city, and settled into the daily routine of a man who is working far from home and trying not to think too much about how much he misses it. Picture him on an ordinary evening, sitting in that small rented room writing a letter home. His dinner finished, the city outside quiet, a man counting the days. He had no idea he was living inside a target. By the summer of 1945, Japan was losing the war. Everyone knew it, even if nobody said it out loud. American B-29 bombers had been firebombing Japanese cities for months. Tokyo had been devastated. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya. The bombs fell on civilians, on factories, on everything. Hiroshima had been spared so far, and some people took that as a sign that the Americans were saving it for something. But nobody knew what. Yamaguchi knew the war was going badly. He was an educated man, a technical man, and he could read between the lines of the official reports. But he was also a man with a job to finish, and he finished it. By early August 1945, the tanker design was complete. His team had done their work. It was time to go home. The morning of the 6th of August, 1945, was a Monday. Yamaguchi woke up early, gathered his belongings, and headed toward the Mitsubishi office to collect the travel documents he needed. He was walking through a potato field on the outskirts of the city. He remembered that clearly. The potato field, the wide open sky, when he heard it. A single B-29 flying overhead, very high, almost too high to see. He looked up. He saw 2 small objects fall from the plane. One of them was a parachute with instruments attached. The other was a bomb. What happened next is something that human language was not really designed to describe. At 8:15 in the morning, the bomb known as Little Boy detonated approximately 1,900 feet above the center of Hiroshima. The explosion released energy equivalent to roughly 15,000 tons of TNT in a fraction of a second. The fireball at the center reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The blast wave traveled outward at thousands of miles per hour. Within 1 mile of the hypocenter, almost nothing survived. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was approximately 2 miles away. The flash hit first, a white light so intense that it wasn't really a color. It was more like the concept of light itself, pure and absolute and obliterating. Yamaguchi instinctively dove to the ground and covered his eyes with his hands and pressed his face into the dirt of the potato field. The shockwave hit a moment later and threw him into the air. He lost consciousness. When he came to, the world had changed. He described it afterward as feeling like he had surfaced in a different dimension. The sky above him was dark, filled with smoke and ash, and a strange swirling cloud that he would later learn was the mushroom cloud forming above the city. His eardrums had burst. The left side of his body, the side that had been facing the explosion when he hit the ground, was burned. His arms, his face, the exposed skin on his neck. He was partially blind from the flash. He got up. This is one of those details that seems almost incomprehensible when you sit with it. The man got up. He pulled himself out of the dirt of a potato field outside Hiroshima with burst eardrums and flash burns and compromised vision, and he started walking. He was looking for his colleagues. Two other Mitsubishi engineers, men named Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, had been working with him in Hiroshima. He found them. They were alive. All three of them were injured. All three of them were in shock, but all three of them were alive and mobile. And together, they started moving toward the city. What they found when they got there is something that changed all three of them forever. Hiroshima had ceased to exist as a functioning city. Somewhere between 70,000 and 80,000 people died in the first few minutes after the explosion. Tens of thousands more would die in the weeks that followed, from radiation sickness and injuries. Buildings had been vaporized. People had been vaporized. The city was on fire. Survivors wandered through the smoke with skin hanging from their arms, looking for family members, calling out names. Yamaguchi and his colleagues helped where they could. They pulled injured people out of the rubble. They found a shelter to spend the night. Yamaguchi's burns were serious. The skin on the left side of his face, his arms, and the back of his neck was blistered and raw. He wrapped himself in bandages, improvised from whatever fabric he could find. He barely slept. The next morning, he made his way to the train station. The trains were still running. This is one of those facts about Japan that seems almost absurd against the backdrop of total catastrophe. But it is true. They got the trains running again within a day. Yamaguchi found a train. He got on it, and on the 7th of August 1945, one day after surviving the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, he rode the train home to Nagasaki. Here is what you need to understand about Nagasaki in August of 1945. It was not the intended target. The bomb that would be dropped on August 9th was called Fat Man, and it was originally aimed at the city of Kokura. Kokura was a major military target, home to one of Japan's largest weapons arsenals. The B-29 carrying Fat Man, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, flew toward Kokura on the morning of the 9th and found it completely obscured by clouds and smoke from a firebombing the previous day. Sweeney circled 3 times. He couldn't get a visual on the target. He couldn't drop the bomb blind. His orders required visual confirmation. After 3 passes, with fuel running low, Sweeney turned the plane toward the secondary target. That secondary target was Nagasaki. Nagasaki was also partially clouded, and Sweeney came within minutes of abandoning the mission entirely and returning to base. But then a gap opened in the clouds, just large enough, just long enough. The bomb dropped at 11:02 inches the morning. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Nagasaki. He was sitting in his supervisor's office at the Mitsubishi shipyard, explaining what had happened to him in Hiroshima 3 days earlier. His supervisor did not believe him. This detail stops people every time they hear it. The man sat there, wrapped in bandages, face and arms burned, and tried to convince his boss that a single bomb had destroyed an entire city. His supervisor told him he was exaggerating, that no bomb could do what he was describing, that it was probably a conventional firebombing. And at that exact moment, at 11:02 inches the morning, on the 9th of August, 1945, Fat Man detonated approximately 1,650 feet above Nagasaki. Once again, the white light. Once again, The shockwave. Once again, the world ending. Yamaguchi was blown across the room. The windows shattered inward. The building shook. He hit the ground for the second time in 3 days, in a second city, in a second atomic explosion. He survived again. The survival itself is something that physicists and historians have spent considerable time analyzing, and the answer is both simple and profound. Yamaguchi survived both bombs for the same fundamental reason. He was not close enough to the hypocenter to be killed instantly, and he was far enough away that the initial blast did not kill him, but close enough that it should have. In both cities, he was roughly 2 miles from the explosion. In both cases, he was near ground cover when the shockwave hit, which reduced his exposure to the overpressure that killed so many others. And in both cases, he was young, physically fit, and extraordinarily determined to survive. After the second bomb, Yamaguchi crawled out of the rubble of the Mitsubishi building and made his way home. His wife and son had survived. They had been home when the bomb fell, and their neighborhood, while damaged, had been far enough from the hypocenter to escape the worst of the blast. The family was together. For the next several weeks, all of them were seriously ill. This is the part of Yamaguchi's story that tends to get left out of the short versions: the radiation sickness. Yamaguchi had been exposed to massive doses of radiation twice. His body was breaking down. He had a high fever for weeks. He lost his hair. He was vomiting. His burns became infected. His wife and son were also sick from the fallout radiation in Nagasaki. The family did not know if any of them were going to survive. They survived. Tsutomu Yamaguchi continued working after the war, eventually becoming a teacher. He was a quiet man about his experiences for a long time. In Japan, in the post-war years, survivors of the atomic bombings, people known as hibakusha, faced significant social stigma. There was discrimination in employment, in marriage, in social life. People feared radiation sickness was contagious. People feared association with defeat and destruction. Many survivors kept quiet about what they had experienced, not because they had forgotten, but because the world around them seemed to prefer not to know. Yamaguchi was different from most hibakusha in one particular way. He had been in both cities. This was documented. Mitsubishi had records placing him in Hiroshima on August 6th and in Nagasaki on August 9th. The Japanese government, which recognized hibakusha status and provided certain benefits to survivors, initially recognized him only as a Nagasaki survivor. For decades, the extraordinary fact of his double survival was not officially acknowledged. He raised a family. He had 3 children. He watched the city rebuild around him. He watched Japan rebuild around him. And quietly, over the years, he began to speak. He spoke at schools. He testified before the United Nations. He described what he had seen in Hiroshima and what he had seen in Nagasaki, not in the language of politics or ideology, but in the language of a man who had been there. There is one moment from his testimony that people who heard it never forgot. He was asked once, by a student, what he wanted people to feel when they heard his story. He thought for a long moment. Then he said he did not want them to feel fear. He wanted them to understand what was worth protecting. He talked about the ordinary morning. He talked about the potato field. He talked about walking into what remained of Hiroshima and helping people who were dying. He talked about sitting in his supervisor's office and being told that no single bomb could do that, and then the light coming through the window again. He was not an angry man, by most accounts. He was not a man consumed by bitterness or trauma, though he had every reason to be. He was a man who believed very deeply that what he had witnessed gave him a particular obligation, an obligation to bear witness, an obligation to say, this is what it was, this is what it felt like. This is what a city looks like after one bomb. Imagine what the world looks like after many. And in 2009, 64 years after the bombs fell, the Japanese government officially recognized him as a Niju Hibakusha, a double bomb survivor. The only person in history to receive that official designation. He was 89 years old when they gave him that piece of paper. Here is the part of the story that I think about the most. Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old. He died in January 2010 in Nagasaki of stomach cancer. He had outlived his wife, who died of cancer in 2008. He had outlived many of the friends and colleagues he had known in both cities. He had outlived 2 atomic bombs and 65 years of their aftermath. In all of those decades, the thing that seemed to stay with him most was not the bombs themselves, but the ordinariness of the moments before them. How completely normal everything felt. How he was just a man going home. How the sky looked like any other sky. There is a word in Japanese, mono no aware, that roughly translates to the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. The understanding that beautiful things are beautiful, partly because they do not last. Yamaguchi never used that phrase in his interviews, as far as anyone knows. But there is something in the way he described those mornings, the specific light, the specific air, the specific feeling of a completely ordinary day, that makes you think he understood it better than most people ever will. He was a man who had seen, twice, the exact moment when ordinary life ends. And he spent the rest of his life trying to make sure that other people understood what that looked like. Not so they would be afraid, so they would understand what was worth protecting. The potato field, the morning sky, the train home, the wife and the son, the ordinary, irreplaceable, completely unguaranteed fact of being alive on a Tuesday morning with your whole life in front of you. He had that. He almost lost it twice. And he spent 93 years making sure nobody forgot what almost losing it looks like. Thanks for watching this one all the way through. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. It helps the channel more than you'd think. Subscribe if you want to see what comes next. See you tomorrow.